how do you skip a jig on a bait cast? 90% of it is in your rod and reel. Back in the 70s and 80s, when everybody first started bass fishing with jigs, flipping jigs, everybody thought you got to have this 7.5-foot broomstick to set the hook on a jig. And that may have been true 30, 40 years ago when everybody was using dull hooks and everybody was using monofilament. You had so much stretch. But now you've got fluorocarbon line. I use 20-pound P-line tactical fluorocarbon on all my jig fishing. And you've got jigs with sharp hooks on it. I mean, you look at hooks like the Berkeley Fusion 19 series, they're super sharp hooks, so you don't have to have that super extra heavy long rod to set the hook on a fish with a jig anymore like you used to 20 or 30 years ago. So I designed a skipping rod from Fitzgerald Rod, this my signature series skipping rod, and it's only 6 feet 9 inches, so it's a 6'9" heavy action skipping rod, but it's still got a lot of tip on it. And that's where I talked about earlier, I see people messing up. They get a really stiff rod, and that completely eliminates any chance you have to skip a bait. Because if you think about that rod, it's not gonna flex, and if you've got a real stiff rod, it doesn't flex, and you can't slingshot that bait underneath a dock, because that's the whole key to skipping a jig, is getting that bait going really fast where it's going to want to slide across the top of the water instead of nosedive in the water. And so if you start out with a really good rod, like I said, this is a 6'9" heavy action skipping rod. And one thing that sets it apart from most other rods in that 6.5-foot range is the handle length. Most 6'8" to 6'10" rods have a shorter handle that you can only grip with one hand. And you can see I've still got plenty of length on this handle here because I make a two-handed skip cast a lot of times. So I can put my other hand on the butt of that rod, and I've still got butt behind my hand, and it's not hanging off the rod, where if I had a short handle, I'd be like that, and it wouldn't be natural, it wouldn't be comfortable, and you couldn't make a good cast and follow through with your cast. And now I'm going to dwell on the following through with the cast part. So, well, let me go to reels first. We talked about rod, we talked about line. The reel I use is Abu Garcia Revo STX. I always use a 7:3 gear ratio reel. And that gives me kind of the best of both worlds. You don't want a reel that's too slow, and you don't want one that's too fast that you're going to burn that bait back to the boat, because I'm sure everybody that's fished a jig, you've wound your jig to the boat, and a 4-pounder chases out from underneath the dock and blow up beside the boat, and you never catch it. So when you've got a really fast reel, you'll miss a lot of those bites. But with having just a little bit slower speed, a lot of times you can catch yourself quick enough to get that fish to come in and catch it. So, excuse me, Revo STX reel, skipping rod, and the whole deal with skipping a jig is following through with your cast. It's just like throwing a baseball, throwing a football, anything like that. If you start your momentum and when you release that baseball, if you stop your arm right there, it's not going to go very far. You're not going to be able to throw it very accurate, and you can't get any speed on it. It's the same way when you're skipping a jig. And I see people a lot of times, they want to, like I said earlier, I use the two-handed sidearm cast, but they want to draw that rod way back here to make their cast. All that's wasted momentum. The whole deal is getting the tip speed. So the faster you snap your wrist when you go to start your cast, the more velocity you're going to have on that bait for your initial cast, and it's going to hit the water traveling faster, and that's going to let that jig skip farther and just use that natural momentum to be able to make a longer cast. So you don't have to draw way back and just sidearm it and give it all you've got to get it to go. Just come back, just half your body length, just 4 or 5 feet, and right when you release, roll your wrist under really hard, like you were going to throw a curveball when you're throwing a baseball or something like that. Snap your wrist hard, and what that does is, having that softer action rod, you see I've got about a foot of tip there, so that's going to give me a little bit of flex. So when I start my backswing and I load it and roll my wrist under, that tip's going to bend back 6 or 7 inches, and as you come forward to release your cast, the tip's going to help slingshot that bait forward. So you're going to get more velocity by that from your rod and from snapping your wrist really hard. And this is where I see people mess up the most. Once they release that bait, they stop their rod right there and leave it pointed at the water. And that goes against all kind of, I guess, engineered physics of skipping a bait or anything. That is no good. Because if you think about it, when you release your cast and you say you slide under that pontoon right there, you stop your rod right there, it's pointed at the water. So you've got a 20-pound P-line tactical fluorocarbon. That line is hitting the water, so that's creating drag. What's drag going to do to your bait? It's going to slow it down, and it's going to make that bait want to stop and fall into the water instead of skipping. So when you start your cast, you've got it rolling. Once that bait hits the water, start raising your rod tip up and thumbing the reel. Thumb the reel spool, raise your rod tip up, and what that does is that lifts your line off the water. So every time that bait hits, as you're following through and you're lifting up, every time that bait hits the water, by lifting your rod, it's going to lift that jig and let it keep going and going and going until hopefully it gets where you want, or it hits a dock post or something like that, which I do that a lot too. Anybody that says they don't backlash when they're skipping a jig under a dock, they're telling a lie, I promise you. Everybody here's done that, right? I've been a professional for 13 years, and I still carry an extra spool of line in the boat because I know I'm going to backlash sometime during the day, and there's a chance I'm going to have to cut it out and put a new line on. So don't be scared of that. And that, to me, that's the whole key technique when you're skipping that jig. Make sure you follow through with your cast, raise that rod up when your bait hits, and you'll be able to get that bait to skip farther and farther and farther. So if you're comfortable now skipping and you can skip that bait 5 or 6 feet under a dock, just by doing that, you're going to be able to skip that bait 10 to 20 feet under that dock. It's going to get you 5 to 10 more feet on each cast just by getting your line off the water. And another thing that I do, I get asked a lot of questions on with the jig is, what size jig do you use? And I use a 1/2 ounce jig 100% of the time. It does not matter if I'm fishing 2 feet deep or 40 feet deep. I've got a 1/2 ounce jig if I'm skipping docks. And the whole reason for that is to have that extra weight. With a 3/8 ounce jig, I'm not as accurate, and I can't skip it as far as I can that 1/2 ounce. I just can't generate the same amount of velocity. But you can also change the way that jig skips by using a different trailer. So say you go to, you're using something like a Demiki Knockout or a Zoom Big Salty Chunk, just something with a wide surface area. It's just like skipping a rock. The flatter, smaller that rock is, the flatter it is, more surface area, the better that rock skips. And it's the same way with that jig. If the bigger, bulkier chunk you use, trailer you use, the better that jig's going to skip. And it'll also skip better if you thread your trailer up on the hook instead of, excuse me, instead of just nose hooking. Does everybody know what I'm talking about there? So if you take that Demiki Knockout, you just nose hook it on the jig where it's just hanging off the back of the hook, it'll still skip, but it doesn't skip as well as if you thread it up on the hook and actually push it up on the hook. And that gives you a big fixed surface area, because if you think about it, when you take your trailer and you hook it through the nose of the bait, every time that jig hits the water, that trailer is going to flop around. It's got a lot more freedom of movement, a lot more drag, it's going to catch more water, and therefore it's not going to skip quite as far. But if you thread it up on there, it doesn't move around as much, it stays more stationary, and it'll skip a lot better. And as far as, like I said, I use a 1/2 ounce jig all the time. If I want to change my rate of fall, I'll go down to a smaller diameter line. I might drop down to a 15-pound line, or go down to a smaller size trailer like a speed crawl or something like that, just to change my rate of fall. But I'm still using the same setup as far as rod and the reel goes, same size jig and everything, and just change your line diameter, because very few people think about how much line diameter really plays into jig fishing. I mean, it's been known in the crankbait world for a long time. If you want to get your crankbait to dive deeper, you throw smaller line. And everybody's like, well, you throw an 8 or 10, that really doesn't matter versus the diameter of the line, because a 10-pound monofilament is the same diameter as a 15-pound fluorocarbon. So right now, if you're cranking with mono and you're throwing 10 pound, you can get the same depth with a 15-pound line just by switching to a quality fluorocarbon like key lime tackle. And the advantages of that is you're going to break less fish off. It's more abrasion resistant. It's just anytime you can get away with a bigger size line, you're better off as far as landing fish goes and setting the hook and stuff like that. So that's something to be very conscious with on a jig also. It plays the same factor. You can get that bait to fall faster rates just by dropping down on your line size. Any questions so far? We got to have one somewhere. I'm talking too fast. What color jig do I like the best? My number one rule for jig fishing on color selection is if I can put a green pumpkin trailer on it and it looks good, it's a good color jig. There's 400 different shades of brown to green colored jigs. I don't believe any one of them is any better than the other. As long as it's some kind of a natural brown color, the fish around here, like Lake Norman area, I know High Rock's probably a little different because the water's stained up a lot more often, and you'd probably want to go to a black and blue jig or something like that a lot more there. But as far as the couple of times I have caught them on a jig at High Rock, I would throw a brown and blue jig and put a green pumpkin trailer or like a flipping blue colored trailer on it in stained water. And that's normally my go-to dirty water jig because if I'm fishing, say High Rock, where maybe the lower end you've got 3 feet of visibility, 3 or 4 feet, and the upper end you can only see 8 to 10 inches. By throwing a brown and blue skirt, it's half brown, half blue. We actually named it Big Ugly. That's what we called it because it's brown and blue. It's kind of ugly. Everybody throws black and blue, but nobody throws brown and blue. So we named this jig Big Ugly, and the reason we threw brown and blue combination is because we could put a green pumpkin trailer on it in clear water and still get bit on it just as good as a regular brown jig. And then if we drove 5 miles up the lake, instead of having to tie on another jig, we could just take that green pumpkin trailer off and put a flipping blue trailer on it, and we've got a good dirty water color also. So it's kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone type color. But as far as jig colors, it's some type of brown, a white jig, and a brown and blue jig is the only 3 colors I throw ever. Simple enough. Any more questions? I've taught everybody in here how to skip a jig in 10 minutes. This is amazing. I use a hand-tied shooter lures jig. They're made, Louis Hole makes them in Kaiser, North Carolina, and it's just a quality hand-tied jig. It's got an Arky style head. It's got a good 4/0 mustad hook, I think is what he uses. And I think he actually makes some with a Gamakatsu too, but it's just a good all-around jig. And if that's all the questions, y'all want to come up and feel the action on the rod. I know they've got a rack of my Signature Series Fish Herald rods, and they've got the retail's $189. They've got them on sale this week for $169. They don't have any of the skipping rods in, but he is taking orders on them for $169, and they will be here in less than 2 weeks if you'd like to order one today. So, if you want to come up and check it out, come on, and appreciate you listening to me.